Hello, and welcome to COVID Confessions. This episode, we interview Jody Delau, principal of Whittier Elementary School. When we started recording this episode, neither of us really knew what the full role of a principal was, so for us, this episode was very educational. We really valued the unique perspective of a principal managing a school during a global pandemic. I hope you enjoy this excellent interview. Hello, everyone. We are here with Jody Delau, right? Yeah.
Yep.
She is a principal at Whittier School and also my aunt. So yeah, if you could just introduce yourself, name, pronouns, relation to the school system.
Yeah, hi, Jody Delau, she, her pronouns, and yes, I'm a principal, actually a principal on special assignment, which is very similar. We don't need to get into the semantics of that. And I've been a principal with Minneapolis Public Schools for, this is my 8th year as principal for Minneapolis Public Schools. So that's, I guess, my relationship to both Whittier specifically and to Minneapolis Public Schools in general.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what your job entails? What does a principal do? Or just
Sure.
a brief overview.
Yeah, because we could be here for hours.
Yeah.
So a principal does a ton, but in general, a principal's in charge of leading the school. But what I really look at a principal is doing is making sure that there's support in place for the teachers so that they can support the students. But it's really making sure that everything is as it needs to be. So like in the summer, we're making sure that there's staffing in place for all the different classrooms or all the different support positions, etc. Mm-hmm. During the year, it's doing observations. It's making sure that we have a master schedule in place. It's making sure that if someone's out, what is the coverage plan? It's if there's an upset parent, making sure you talk and all the needs are met there. So there's just kind of a lot of little pieces, but it's making sure that the school runs smoothly, that the licensed staff, non-licensed staff, that the staff are feeling supported, that the students have an awesome educational environment. Mm-hmm. But really, it's all about the joy, the significance, the belonging of all of our stakeholders and bringing people together.
Yeah. How do you enjoy it?
I love it.
You love it?
I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
The students are amazing. The staff are amazing. We have great parents, great community members. We have a great team. So I really do enjoy it.
That's awesome.
And that's great. Yeah. When COVID came around, sort of initially, what ended up changing about your job and what you had to do for those first few months at the end of the kind of 2019, 2020 school year?
Sure. Oh my goodness. It changed dramatically. So we absolutely, all of us went home. And so my job, so much of all of our jobs in education was to be there in person for the students. We weren't an online school. We weren't equipped to be an online school. And all of a sudden we were in distance learning. So the job of everybody within every school changed from in-person to distance learning or to online. And so absolutely my job changed. It was how can I support in a remote fashion our students, our families, our teachers. How could I also, when I talked about observations, how do you do an observation in an online format? It was different. You still can, but now it's you are doing it via Zoom or Google Classroom or Seesaw or all these different platforms. Mm-hmm. And then also you have staff within each school, within our school, who have different levels of tech savvy. And so they need different levels of support. You have families and students. You have students as young as 4 in your high 5 classrooms who have no idea how to get online, right? Yeah. And then you have 5th graders. So you just are trying to figure out how you can best support people with different levels of support needed. You have families that don't even have internet at home. So You're also figuring out, if you're not physically supposed to go into the building, how are you going to get devices to families, or how are you going to meet the needs of families? So yes, my role changed dramatically at first. And that was that entire first school year. We weren't called back physically to come back to the schools, administrators, until August of that second year. Staff didn't need to report back, and students didn't come back to the school until further into that school year, until second semester. So then we had this semester where I was back in the school which I enjoyed and appreciated, because then if a family needed to come in because their device wasn't working, I was there. Instead of being anywhere else in the building, we have like a circular drive where parents could drive up to the door and just meet me, and I could like help reset a device, or I could troubleshoot with them, not on the phone where it was like, well, what are you seeing on your screen? And I'm not a IT support person, but I kind of became an IT support person. I'm like, oh, so instead of asking what they were seeing, I could actually look at their device, reset their device, all masked up, and because we still weren't sure like how exactly is this spread and all that stuff. So I think my role changed dramatically originally, and then through each stage, it kind of kept evolving.
Yeah. As you kind of got like further into the pandemic, and I guess closer to like coming back to in person, did your roles like immediately revert back to what you were doing prior, or are you still like working through the effects of COVID?
I would say we're still working through it in a way. I mean, I would say there are certain things that no matter what stage we've been in that still have to get done. Like observations like they're state mandated by the Minnesota Department of Education that like observations have to happen, or the scheduling has to happen. In fact, all of a sudden scheduling had to happen in a different way when we were on distance learning, because our specialist team, our Phy Ed teacher, our art teacher, our media specialist, etc., they still had to see all the students, but for a number of minutes. And I mean, everything changed, but those things still had to happen, along with that extra layer of how do you help support people with the technology piece. I mean, so certain layers were added, and certain things were taken off the plate in a way. Like I do a lot of as an administrator, there's a lot of behavior support, or student is struggling today because, they had a really bad weekend, and so they're coming in and things are going sideways. Right. Like, that's not happening so much when you're on distance learning. So maybe there's a few things that aren't happening, but now you have these extra layers of things that are happening. So I feel like as we went through the different stages of everyone was remote, then some students started coming back, but we had something was called hybrid learning. So families had the option. So we had a semester of that where families could decide, I'm either sending my student back or they're going to be at home. And so we had some staff who were offering still remote learning classes, and some who were offering in-person classes. So kind of mitigating that. So as we worked through the different stages, and then we eventually went to the point where everyone had to be back, and families who wanted to still stay online, they had to enroll in a different school, the Minneapolis online school. So as we worked through all those different stages, it felt like my job, along with everyone's job, was kind of constantly in flux a little bit. Like roles, my roles were changing and altering. But even to this day, like we still have to figure out if a staff member tests positive, like how many days they need to be out, and if they come back they have to wear a mask. Like all that stuff wasn't there before COVID. Like our lives changed a bit, and even for that, when we first came back in person, it was if someone was a close contact, all of a sudden you'd have entire classrooms that would go out for 10 days, and then the entire classroom would come back in. So we'd also have to keep track of which classrooms, while everyone was back, were now in distance learning for 10 days. And then all of a sudden it was, we're not going to do that, but the person who has tested positive will be out for 10 days, but everyone else can stay. And then it was, now we're going to do 5 days, but they can come back with a mask. So, so even that continues to change. So we absolutely still have pieces. I know that, that as a nation, we're kind of saying, COVID's no longer a pandemic, and there's a lot of things we're not doing, but it's still lingering and with us. Like we're still aware of it. We're still trying to make sure students are doing a really good job washing hands, and staff, of course, and making sure if someone's not feeling well, they're wearing masks, not mandating anything, but just trying to really be mindful of all those pieces.
Absolutely.
Outside of yourself and your own duties, when COVID started, what changes sort of happened within staff and students that you noticed?
There was a lot of uncertainty, right? So there was a lot of fear. So one thing I noticed, not initially, but well, a few things. Let's talk about the initial. Initially, one of the biggest things I noticed is, again, some people were like, we don't know how to do this. So there was the, we don't know how to do online school, or we don't know how to, both on the staff and the student level. And again, there was different levels of comfort, students or adults or parents. Parents would call and say, I don't know how to connect. Where am I finding the link? And same with if we'd have parent-teacher conferences or caregiver conferences, it would be like, where is that link? How do I sign up? How do I do this? So there was just a lot of that uncertainty. So that was a piece. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? Because I lost my train of thought.
You're fine.
Okay.
What were things that you noticed changes within like staff and students?
So I think that was the initial, was a lot about the technology. And then I think as people became more comfortable with technology, it was still the uncertainty of like how things were spread, right? Because originally, once we came back into the school, it was everyone had to be either 6 feet apart or was it 12 feet apart?
Right.
And did we need to wash surfaces like 3 times a day, once a day? Did we have to use a defogger machine? I mean, there was like so much uncertainty of how this was spread. And this was, by the time we actually came back to school in person, it was almost a year, right? So we went we went home in March, like mid-March. I mean, you guys remember, it was like mid-March. By the time we came back in person, like we administrators were already back, but by the time students came back, I think it was February. So it had been 11 months.
Oh, yeah.
So it's amazing that we hadn't figured some of this stuff out, but seriously, some people were really worried. And I mean, all of us, like, because we just didn't know. Another change is some people were so worried that they're like, I'm not coming back. I'm retiring. I'm quitting. I'm resigning. So that's, I know it's in other professions as well, but the big resignation, the great resignation, right? So we all of a sudden had a lot of positions to fill. And we also noticed that a lot of subs were all of a sudden not picking things up because they also were worried about their health, their families, etc. So another big change is prior to COVID, we typically got subs who were able to fill positions. Also, because of the criteria, if you weren't well or if you were positive for COVID, that you had to be out so many days, we just had a lot of absences. And without having subs to fill it, we just kept having to pull people throughout the building to do a lot of coverage. So it felt like we were kind of always in this state of exhaustion because of all the internal coverage that happened. And that was really tough. So that first half year back, and then even into the next year, which would have been last year, it felt like we had this coverage fatigue.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Were there ways like that you found you could cope with that?
One thing Minneapolis did, which I was very appreciative of, is they created a building reserve position for us at Whittier. And I'm not every single school got a building reserve, but I think 70, is that right? No. Several schools, dozens of schools, maybe 35 schools. I don't know, half of our schools got a building reserve position. So both last year and this year, we did have a building reserve position, and that absolutely did help overall with staffing for us. And also we tried to create an equitable way to do coverage. Like we tried to track it in a way or have people tied with certain grade levels so that you became more familiar with those students, those grades, the curriculum, etc., so that you weren't being pulled all day, every day across the school. So that those things did help a little bit with the fatigue. Also, Minneapolis Public Schools was able to offer an increase in the amount of pay if teachers took on additional students. And or if they lost their prep due to this. So that also helped financially if someone had to do this. So I think that was a good thing as well, because it kind of sucked, but if you got a little extra money, then it
made it a little bit more worth it.
Absolutely.
What were some ways that you and the school were able to provide support to students?
You mentioned the piece with technology and having people drive up and ask you for help.
I think that was huge, and I don't know how many other schools did that. I don't know if many did, but I did, because I thought, I mean, throughout the whole thing, I just really tried to put myself in students' shoes and families' shoes. And I thought if it were me as a parent or me as a student, I'd really want some actual help. So
Right.
I moved, I had this standing desk, so I just wheeled it down there and put a chair down there. I asked for my phone to move down there. So I didn't even see my office for that whole half year. I was just, that was my place. And so that was the main thing I think that I did for families. I also gave out my cell phone number, so if any family needed to get a hold of me, like I just wanted to be really approachable and available for families, for students. And we also had and we still have an amazing staff, and many of them created Google Classroom phone numbers. Yeah. I mean, I always just gave out my real phone number because I didn't care, but some people wanted a little bit of that boundary, but they still wanted to be available. So they created, like our social workers, a Google Classroom phone number so that our parents could get a hold of someone. And so with a Google Classroom phone number, you can text it, you can call it, you can leave a message. It appears like a real phone number, but if you ever leave Minneapolis, it's not tied to your actual phone. So you guys are familiar with that's good. So I think that's something we did and we tried to do across the site. Right. So that we were really available. We also had office hours because if someone was struggling, yes, I can help reset a device. Hey, buddy. I can reset a device, but that doesn't help if there's an issue with a Seesaw or the Google Classroom or something. So teachers also having office hours, I think, was a huge help so that a parent can be like, hey, Miss Shanahan, or Teacher X or Teacher Y. Like, my child is struggling connecting with this specific piece. Right. So I helped kind of with the global, but teachers were able to help with the specifics. And so I think that was really helpful. Yeah. We also would have some, we would try to do some fun, engaging activities and have time for more collaboration with staff to be able to create some of these. We also did a few events where families could come to the park, and like it was nearing where we thought, okay, we think it's okay for them to get together. And so we do a few events at the park because I think our families were really feeling and our students really disconnected. Yeah. And so we had a few of those events, and we also had at the end of the year, we usually have a big graduation. So we did a few outdoor things where we're like, okay, we're going to get together and have popsicles and some sort of social distancing, like promotion ceremonies. Yes. We can't be in the building, but we can still see each other and help our students feel like some sense of normalcy in these really troubling times.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you notice when people came back together that there was a lot of like hesitancy as to like interactions?
Absolutely. And again, it's a continuum. Yes. Some people were like, I'm so happy to see you. And there weren't hugs, but there was like air hug. Yeah. Or like, there was a lot of like, elbow bumps and things like that.
Elbow bumps.
And it's interesting because now people are hugging again. Absolutely. Yeah. But again, there were some people who said, I can't do it. And so again, we had some people resign, some people retire. Some people came back for a few weeks and they're like, I just can't do this. Yeah. And so then they thought they could, but they couldn't, and they left. Yeah. And it was really kind of sad because, I mean, you get it. Like when you feel like my life might be in danger or in jeopardy, or my spouse has a pre-existing condition, or my child is immunocompromised, or any of those pieces, I get it. And we weren't sure. Yeah. And so, there was absolutely some hesitancy, and sometimes it was our staff, sometimes it was the students although students are pretty resilient. I don't know that students themselves express that, but sometimes it was our parents on behalf of the students. Right.
Yeah. So, how was it dealing with parents during COVID? Did they have a lot of questions? Because I know our school kind of failed on the communication piece, and everybody seemed to have questions all the time.
Yeah, they did, but I feel like we were pretty responsive. So when parents had questions, I feel like we answered them quickly, so that felt good. Although I feel like there's always going to be a select few of any group that you're talking about, whether you're talking about parents or teachers or customers or fans or whatever group of people you're talking about in the world, cousins, that someone will say you're not communicating enough. Some people say you're over communicating. Yeah, I'd say for most people, most of our parents would say, Whittier did a great job.
Awesome.
They were helpful and they communicated and we got
Yeah.
our questions answered. I'm sure there's a few that
Awesome.
would say we needed more information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally fair.
Now that we are a good bit away, at least from social distancing,
Yes.
and that entire charade, do you think, looking at what you and the school had done during COVID times, do you think there was anything that you could have done differently or things you wish you could have done differently?
You know, everything we know now, if we knew it then, I don't think we would have gone and had everyone go home. I do feel like students did lose a lot. Some students did well, but I'm even going to take it about, if it's okay, I'm going to talk about being a mom as well.
Of course.
Absolutely, go
So,
for it.
I know that COVID was challenging for my children,
Mhm.
particularly my youngest. And I know what I know about her now is she will never sign up for an online school because she would never want to. Like,
Yeah.
it's not her jam. Like, hanging out at home and doing online school and not being in a classroom, not her mode of learning.
Yeah.
And we found that was true for a lot of our students as well.
Mhm.
And so if we knew then what we knew now about how it was spread and how we could mitigate things, I don't think we would have sent students home for almost a year.
Right.
Right, but we didn't know that. Like, and we
Yes.
wanted to save lives and believe in the science.
Mhm.
I stand by what we did because we didn't
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
And I also believe that saving lives is incredibly important and more important than these other things. So
Mhm.
I stand by the decisions we made, but it's just unfortunate that we didn't know then what we knew now, because it would have been ideal to keep students in school.
Right,
Mhm.
absolutely.
You know, and some of the things about like social distancing or trying to keep
Mhm.
kids 12 feet apart, that was so hard when we got back. And like,
Yeah.
we had high five kids who were 4 who were like, I'm not wearing this mask. Oh, sorry. And you were like, yeah, you are. And like trying to
Yeah.
reason with the 4-year-old who doesn't, want this piece of fabric on their face and like
Yeah.
really show that a lot of masks, especially when they're not exactly fitting the best, don't do the
Yeah,
greatest
absolutely.
job anyway. And so, like, getting into power struggles with a 4 or 5-year-old about mask wearing
Yeah.
was not great when we returned.
Not
Absolutely.
fun.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I have siblings and it was the same struggle at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And now they come home sick every single week.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Were you ever overwhelmed balancing like being a mother and dealing with your children's schools and then like dealing with your own school and other people's children?
No, but maybe I should have been. Like, maybe if I would have been a little more, then maybe Lou would have done better. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't. She'd be like, why are they talking about me? But I think I was like, during the day, I'm like, I think I really wore the hat of, during the day, I'm a principal. So during the day, I primarily focused on Whittier.
Yeah.
And then in the evening, I'd be like, Lou, did you get your stuff done? And she's like, I'm just waking up. And I'm like, oh, dang. And so
Yeah.
I eventually got to the point where, like, okay, I'm taking a little lunch break. I'm going to go check on her. So
Right.
Mhm.
maybe I should have been a little more balanced between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt I'm getting a paycheck. I need to make sure, like,
Yeah.
during these hours, I'm focused
Absolutely.
on work and
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I tend to not all that often do I get, usually at work, I have a way of just kind of figuring out all the stuff I have to do and
Mm-hmm.
how to fit it in and prioritize. So it's very rare that I get overwhelmed with anything related to work,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just how my brain works. Usually if I
Yeah.
ever get overwhelmed with anything, it's
Yeah.
related to home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd sometimes get frustrated or whatever, but it was always usually home related, not principal
Mhm.
related.
Yeah, we found that a lot of teachers and staff who ended up leaving had kids and they were just not able to
balance it.
yeah, not able to balance that. So I just wanted to hear about like
Well,
what you thought.
And maybe some are single parents as well. Like
Yeah.
I'm very
Jeez,
fortunate that like Brody, who's He's like, oh, because this is his nap time, so he's
Mhm.
upstairs napping right now because you guys were coming over.
Yeah.
But I mean, he is in the restaurant business, so his restaurant shut down when we shut down.
Yeah.
And they shut down twice overall. And so he was home.
Mhm.
We were all home. Like, we were home for so
Yes.
long. So it's like, if I was working, I'm like, can you go check on it? You know, so
Yeah.
I was also very fortunate that
Absolutely.
that I had him to help.
Mhm.
But I really felt for so many of our parents who were doing it solo. Like, that was a heavy
Yeah.
lift, that they felt like, yeah, the teacher's putting this content online, but
Mhm.
now I feel like I'm at home, you know, a teacher as well.
Yeah.
And that was a lot for our parents. And so, you know, there was a lot of empathy there, and a lot of, okay, how can we support parents
Mhm.
in this? Because we're asking our parents to do a lot, to lift a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I can definitely relate to that. My mom had a lot of trouble during that time period, because
Right. How old were the girls that first year?
They were like 7, I think.
Right, so
when it
second
started.
grade?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was really hard for all of us.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
going into it.
And she probably expected you to help out.
Oh,
a little
I
bit.
helped out as much as I could.
So we had a lot of that too, where we'd hear from our like 5th grade students, I can't get on right now because I'm helping my kindergarten brother or sister, my
Yeah.
X grade brother or sister.
Mhm.
So we had to so we'd work with our teachers on that too. Like, you have to cut some of the students slack. Like, don't mark them absent if you know that the reason they're not on doing this lesson is because they're in the other teacher's class
Yeah.
helping the first grader or whatever.
Absolutely.
So like make sure there's grace, and giving students the grace, and making sure if they're logging on somewhere in the day that we're giving them attendance credit for the day.
Absolutely.
Like, that they don't need to be on all day every day.
Mhm.
But if they're and let's say they're not able to be on during the day, but that evening they do work, that's
Yeah.
still a positive attendance for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're on somewhere doing something, give them grace. And I'm
Mhm.
also thinking about like Lou, if she slept all day but got on and did an assignment in the evening, right?
Yeah.
She still did something.
Yeah.
Mhm.
She's still doing work and still checking into school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar issue where, like, you know, my brother was just starting preschool and kindergarten, and so I would have to sit in on his classes with him to try and
Yeah.
help him, and I would miss my own classes. And we had a not great attendance sort of situation, but I think a lot of schools struggled with attendance overall during, you know, home isolation.
Yeah.
Were there ways that you, like, tried to incentivize students to come back?
Yes, I'm trying to think of what they were now. But we worked closely with our social workers.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the pathway. So if teachers noticed that there were students who were missing, they would reach out to the social workers, who would create those positive interventions, but they would also reach out to the families. So it's like our
Absolutely.
social workers were the kind of the gatekeepers of those plans, and they would like reach out to the parents and say, hey, we're noticing, like, the teachers would reach out first
Yes.
and say, hey, we're noticing students aren't on. And if that didn't result in a change, then the social workers would take it from there. And then the social workers would reach out and say, hey, how can we help?
Mm-hmm.
And if they'd say, oh, well, yeah, our hotspot's not working, our internet's not working, then they'd get a hold of me. Hey, Tech Delau, we need this, or this. And I'm like, on it. Or it would be like, well, you know, we're finding that, like, there's an issue, like, if there was another service the social worker could provide, because sometimes the students or the families needed some other service, and so social workers are amazing and can do so much for families. And so maybe there was another reason or another piece. Like, for one family, it was like 10 people living in this 2-bedroom house.
Right, yeah.
And they couldn't even hear. So all of a sudden the social worker is getting headsets for all the students, right?
Yeah.
So that when they're on, they can just hear their class. Well, that was an easy fix that we didn't even think of, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what can we do? What's getting in the way? I can't remember right now some of the incentives because it was a few years ago, and I have a mild brain injury, so sometimes things leave me, but they would always be like, we would come together and we'd brainstorm like what are some incentives we could do. And we still do that. Like in-person learning right now, not even related to COVID, my whole time as an administrator, we've always talked about, okay, here's these 5 students who aren't showing up on the regular basis. What will work for this family, for this student? This year we bought a few alarms. And I'm like, alarms, now that people have phones, like needing an alarm seems like such a strange thing,
Mm-hmm.
but some families still need that. So
Yeah.
we will go out and buy an alarm for a family.
Oh, wow.
Or sometimes we're buying Uber cards for families or other things. Like, it's like, figuring out what gets in the way
Mm-hmm.
and how we can do an individual incentive. Because sometimes if you do a school-wide incentive, that feels like it punishes a student. Like, if they can't participate in the reward because they can't get there, is it the student's fault that they're not getting there? I think it's better to target the students who are not getting there and figure out what's in the way and kind of solve for that.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Can you kind of backtracking a little bit, can you go a little bit more in depth on some of the experiences that you noted with your children?
Yeah, so like I have three kiddos, and one was in college at the time.
Oh, goodness.
And in his program, and he was near the beginning of his program, but his program, it required in person. Like, everything was in person. Everything was geared towards in person. And it was very heavily all about the in person. And then I had a child in high school. Yes, would have been high school. And one that was in 6th grade.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Yes. And so for my child in college, it actually wasn't bad, but he was in dental hygiene school, and they had to figure out, as a school, how do we do this if people can't be in person? Because I'm actually glad he was where he was in his years of schooling, because if he would have been further on, there were students closer to graduation who had to delay graduation because you couldn't graduate without so many clinical hours, and you couldn't do clinic without seeing patients.
Yeah.
So for other students, they had to delay graduation by up to a year. So for his grade, they just had to figure out how to actually have a system. Every time they took a test at home, they'd have to have something on his computer so that they could have his camera on, so they could watch him through his computer taking the test.
Yes.
So they'd be monitoring his phone and his computer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was just kind of totally Big Brother, but that's the only way they felt like they could do it. And so they were really worried about like academic honesty and all of this. Like, his institution was really worried about that. But he did okay because he also was in college and he had made it, I think that was easier.
Right.
My child in high school, I think, did okay, but he does better in person. But I think he'd be like, oh, I don't really have school, so I can stay up really late gaming and this and that. And then he'd sleep.
Definitely did that.
He'd sleep late, and he's also someone who would keep his screen off a lot, and then his teachers were like, well, is he really there because his screen's off? And he's not someone who maybe shares a lot in class, so it's like, well, if you're not really sharing and your screen's off, are you really there? So I think that was the issue with my middle child, is teachers weren't sure if he was really there and participating.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I was there listening the whole time. It's like, well, and again, how does the teacher know that? Like, what is... for my youngest, she just shut down. She just didn't, like, it got gradually worse and worse. And the thing is, up until COVID hit, she loved school. She got like all straight A's, loved school, was in the play. Actually, COVID shut down. She was in the play, loved the play. 2 nights before the final performance and the party, the cast party, is when schools shut down.
Oh.
So it was just like, they were so sad because they didn't get to have the cast party. They missed the last night of the performance. And so they were just like, and she had all these great friends, and it's like every month as COVID kind of settled in deeper and deeper, kind of, she just became more isolated, and it was just horrible.
Yeah.
And then when she could go back to school, Minneapolis had changed which school people went to. So all of a sudden she was able to go back to school, but instead of going to the K-8 she had been at her whole academic career, now she was forced to go to a middle school where she didn't really know anyone.
Right.
As she's coming back from COVID. So it was just crappy. And that was just for 1 year, and now this year she's in high school. So it was just not great. So it's like...
Yeah, absolutely.
It was just shit.
Oops,
excuse my language.
All good.
It's fine, nobody cares.
Yeah. I did a lot of, or my mentoring experience was at a school that goes from pre-K to 8th.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think I talked about the most with my mentors was math skills, because a lot of people notice like math skills in children greatly diminished, and they're having to do multiple makeup courses like to like compensate for their like lack in math skills. And I'm wondering, did you notice any of that with, it doesn't have to be math, but any sort of like course?
Oh, math and literacy. Huge holes. Yeah. And it's not for every student.
Yes.
Because again, some students excelled during online distance learning. And some students did a lot of, some parents would say, can you send home materials?
Yeah.
So we would send home materials. In fact, that's another thing I would do, is help since we were there at the door anyway, our first grade team would send home a folder every single Friday for the next week.
Wow.
So that when they went on to distance learning, the teacher would be like, open your folder and I'll take out the yellow sheet.
Yeah.
So like the students, it felt kind of like real school. Like you had all your materials there, and I'd help with like a die cut machine is like this weird old school machine where you can cut different shapes.
Yeah.
And so when they were doing the shape unit, I'd cut all these little triangles and squares and all the shapes, diamonds, etc. So that, and they were all different colors, so the teacher could say, now if you open your envelope, you're going to notice that you have some red triangles and some yellow hexagons, and and they would do all the work with the actual manipulatives.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. And like, let's say we had 40 families in first grade. 35 might pick them up, and then our amazing first grade team would then go and deliver for a few families that weren't able to pick it up. Like, how awesome is that? So they'd actually have materials. So for the students who were actually able to get their materials and participate and understand the technology and actually do all this, maybe they're not going to have as many gaps, right?
Yeah.
But for the students who are like, this is just too much. I can't spend all this time online. I don't understand it. I don't have the materials, because most of our students didn't have materials at home.
Yeah.
Then there are these huge gaps, these chasms that maybe opened up. And we're going to be dealing with that maybe for years to come.
Wow.
So, we definitely, as a school district, and many school districts did that, offered summer programming. But again, in COVID, summer programming looked a lot like it did during the year, right? It was still online, etc. This year was online. This year, we would think it would be amazing if a bunch of students signed up for in-person summer programming to kind of fill some of those holes. But it's really tough. Like when you have when some of those gaps show up, it's kind of sometimes hard to fill those gaps.
Yeah.
And there's ways to do it, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. So many of the things you did, that's amazing. I wish we had that sort of support at our own school.
Yeah.
It was not great. But speaking of looking at what other schools were doing, with your kind of perspective as both a principal and a mother, what do you think of the way that you handled things within your own school versus the way that things were handled in other schools that your children were in? I know this is a kind of big one, so.
Well, I always, as a leader, I always try to center everything we do around the students. So I feel like we did a really good job for the most part, because we keep students in the center. And so, I think Whittier is great. One thing early on, one thing that was hard is we really wanted to have an early on gathering where parents came to the park.
Yeah. And
we were told we couldn't. And that was kind of a bummer. And I get it, because it was safety.
Yeah.
And I think some others were worried that if we had people come to the park that it would be unsafe. which was very disappointing. And I don't know why I even bring that up, other than I think I was thinking at the time of how much students really needed that connection.
Absolutely.
And it didn't. Maybe I didn't even need that piece because it doesn't get to your question all the way. Other than to say that I really believe at Whittier, so many of us were just trying to do what we felt was best for students.
Right. Student focused.
Student
rather
focused.
Than, like, staff focus.
Yeah.
And,
and I think it's because we have an amazing staff. We
Yeah.
have an amazing staff that focused on students.
Mhm.
And I think when fear didn't get in the way, and it's natural when it does, because it
Yes.
was such a scary time because of the unknowns.
Yeah.
So I think for the most part, Whittier did great.
Mhm.
And I felt like, Whittier, I think, did a better job than what I saw from my own children's schools.
Mhm.
Yes. That being said, I'm sure there were schools that did awesome things that we didn't do. Like I saw online a school that did a drive-by parade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, a lot of our families don't have cars. And so if we did a drive-by parade, then does that exclude then some of our families? Like, we want to do something that's inclusive of all.
Yeah.
Like, if we did a parade, we'd want it to be something where you can walk by, you can bike by, you can, all the pieces. And actually, I think what I saw online was the teachers drove by, and then they tried to do a route where it'd be by almost all the students or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is so amazing. Like, I would love to do something like that. And so by the end, when we were able to do things in the park, I felt like then we kind of made up for the event we didn't have early on that I really wish we would have been able to have.
Yeah.
So I felt like we did a lot of the right things, but there's a few other things that I wish we would have been able to do or had been able to do differently.
Absolutely. Do you have anything else that you would like to share before we, I don't know, end the interview? Or
I will have to say, I don't think anyone, no matter what age you were, well, above a certain age, I think though people in probably first grade and beyond will never forget COVID.
Yeah.
like people will always think pre-COVID and COVID. Like we just will live differently. Like there's
absolutely
COVID is with us forever now. Like it's just something that won't go away. But I really think that we've learned from COVID and learned some lessons about how to do a few things.
Bless you.
Thank you. And so, no, I don't think, wow, you guys asked a ton of questions. Hopefully you got some usable information here.
Absolutely.
But I think that's all I really I've shared everything.
Just as a quick closing question, now that we are kind of past the thick of it, what is your outlook on the future in regards to your school and other schools moving forward from COVID?
I think the outlook in general is good. I'm kind of an eternal optimist, though. I just really believe that if you have the right people on the bus and the right seats on the bus, right? If you have people who care about kids, anything is possible.
Yeah.
And really, I'm all about if you have engaging and rigorous curriculum, if you are a school that's all about joy and significance and belonging and being welcoming, if you have this positive culture and climate, you can get through anything. And I think the outlook is good. I think we had a few bumps in the road, but we made it through this and we've learned from it. So not that I want to say bring it on, because I just assumed that the next pandemic hits after I retire or I'm no longer on the planet or something, because I do not want another one anytime soon. But I do think if the world happens to send us, or the universe, another curveball or two, I think we'll figure it out. I think education is filled with a bunch of brilliant minds who are here because we care about kids. We'll figure it out.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much
Yeah,
absolutely.
for talking with us.
Yeah, we really appreciated it. We got a
Yeah.
lot of information.